In this video, I want to show you the most asked questions at Wells Fargo interviews and help you plan strong answers that will maximize your chances of getting hired. So let's look at one of the most important questions, which is, what do you know about Wells Fargo? And if you don't prepare for this and you're not ready for it, you're not going to impress them. So let's look at how to answer it and the facts that you need to take to your interview. So firstly, you have to get the basic facts right. Make sure you're clear about what the company does and explain that clearly. Then you want to show that you're knowledgeable by dropping in some interesting facts about the company. And then to really impress them, you want to put in some deeper level facts so that you can show that you're very well prepared and have developed a good understanding of the business. So I'm going to give you the basic facts that you can take to your interview and then give you some recommendations of some further reading that you can do to ensure that you're up to date with your knowledge. So the first thing you do is you make sure you describe Wells Fargo in the right way. And the best way to do that is to just take how they describe themselves. On their website, they refer to themselves as a diversified, community-based financial services company. That is the phrase that you can use in your interview because that's how they describe themselves. Then you can start widening it. You can say that they are one of the big four banks. That positions them within the marketplace as among the largest banks in the world and in America. They are very heavily focused on consumer banking, among other things. They have a very large presence in consumer banking. They offer brokerage and securities. They've got an asset and wealth management business. They are a major credit card issuer. That's a very big business for them. They actively support the growth of small businesses and have a big presence within small business banking. The company is very effective at cross-selling. That's where a customer comes to them to take one product, but then over time builds up more and more products with the bank and really builds a strong relationship with Wells Fargo over time. And the bank is very effective at encouraging that and getting customers to really build loyalty with the brand. The company is systemically important. That means that the bank is so large and so important that it is completely integral to the success of the entire global financial system. And if it were to get into trouble, that would be a very serious issue for the entire world. It is that important. The other thing you can say is that Wells Fargo is consumer centric. That's a good phrase to use to describe them, and they would probably like to be referred to that way. You should know the CEO and the chair of the company and be ready to use their names to show that you've done that research. The company is formed of lots and lots and lots of different banks that have all merged together to form what is now Wells Fargo, the largest of which that make up a large portion of Wells Fargo is Wachovia and the Northwest Corporation. And I would know those names and know a little bit about the history there. The company was founded by Henry Wells and William Fargo, and if you trace it all the way back, the very start of the company comes to 1852. That is a number that you should know. They provided express, so that's mail delivery and transporting of goods and gold and things like that, and they provided banking services. You may have heard of American Express. Henry Wells and William Fargo were the founders of American Express as well, and that's what the express business became, and the banking business eventually developed into Wells Fargo. The company is strongly linked with the California gold rush and had a huge presence out in the West, and that's what really got their business started. That's where the famous stagecoaches come from as an image of Wells Fargo. They were traveling east and west, providing the banking and express services that the company is famous for. Another great fact that you can say is Wells Fargo was in fact the first bank in the entire world to offer online banking all the way back in 1995, very early days of the internet, and Wells Fargo were there providing online banking. That's a great fact to use to show that you've actually done some deeper research. To even deepen your research further, my top tip is take some time to read Wells Fargo investor presentations, read the annual report, and unusually, Wells Fargo actually has a history website. They have a historian that they employ to research the history of the company and present it, and they have built a Wells Fargo history website, and it's a really great read just for interest, and also say in your interview that you've read these things, that you read the presentations, you read the annual report, and you took some time to dig into the history, and that's really going to be impressive. Tell them you did this preparation, and by reading that, you'll be so much more confident in talking about the things that I've got here. Feel free to take any notes from this slide or screenshot it and use that to help in your preparation. We can now go on and look at the next question, which is, what is your greatest strength? And of course, the next question is going to be, what is your greatest weakness? And we'll look at how you answer both of these. So let's look at how you plan a great answer, what the potential strengths you could use are, and how to actually structure that answer. So the key to success is to pick a significant strength. Don't pick a strength that really isn't a big deal. Pick a strength that actually really matters. Then back it up with evidence and examples. So to make the strength much stronger, you should say things like, in the past, I used this strength to do this, and talk about your accomplishments, or provide some evidence like a qualification, for example, that says somebody else agrees with me that this really is a strength, and it makes it so much more powerful. The next thing you want to do is be specific. Make sure you pick a strength that is highly specific and not something very, very general and effectively a bit wishy-washy and not going to be taken very seriously. Pick something specific. And then make sure it's highly relevant to Wells Fargo. Think about the job that you're going to be doing. Think about what section of the business you're applying for, and think about what Wells Fargo actually does and what they need to be successful, and pick something that matches along with that. So one example might be, I've developed a strong knowledge of accounting theory. If you're applying to a finance function where accounting is going to be a very, very big part of it, understanding businesses, if you are underwriting loans for companies, that knowledge could be really useful and make you very effective at your job. So that's a great one to pick, for example. And then you have to think, how do you actually back this up? And what are you doing to even improve this strength, to make it even stronger, to develop further? Because that's a good thing to show off. So let's say you could say the next paragraph, like, this was a substantial part of my degree, and I've completed further study in this area, and I'm working towards CFA level 1 qualification to deepen, broaden, and expand my knowledge. So if you are early in your career, that's a great example where you're showing that you've actually done lots of study in this area. If you're later on in your career, what you want to be doing is talk about times in your career where you have actually used your strength and what that is actually accomplished. And then to make it even stronger, and for any strength, you should always be doing this. You say, this strength will enable me to quickly add value to Wells Fargo by, and explain how this strength is going to make you better at the job. So I plan out an answer to this, explaining what your strength is, how you know that you've got this strength, some examples and some proof, and then explain what your strength is actually going to do to help the company. And that's going to help you ace this question. So the next one we're going to look at is, what is your greatest weakness? And this one you've got to be careful for, and you're really looking to survive this question. You're not looking to give a fantastic answer because you're talking about a weakness. You're talking about something that's not good. What you're looking to do is give the best answer that you can that gets you through this question. So let's look at what you've got to do and what you've got to avoid. So you've got to show that you're reflective. You've got to show that you know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and that you're also, importantly, going to be working on fixing your weakness. In this question, you want to spend more time talking about fixing it than it being a problem. The next thing you have to make sure, and it should be obvious, but people get this wrong, is make sure it's irrelevant to Wells Fargo. Do not pick something that is important. For example, if you said that accounting is a weakness of yours, or that you really struggle with numbers, then perhaps don't work at a bank. That's the sort of thing you have to think. If it's something that's important to them, do not pick it as a weakness. Pick something they really don't care about. And we'll look at some examples of that. So the way that you actually structure this is, you say one particular area which I've identified as a weakness and which I intend to develop is, just say what the weakness is, move on quickly and say, over time I hope to, and then tell them what you're going to do about it. And that's how you get through that. Non-answers that you must avoid is saying, I don't have any. It's not going to show you're reflective. I work too hard. Well, yes, that's not going to be a huge problem in banking. It's probably going to be quite encouraging, quite helpful, because you're going to have a very difficult, hard-working job. Or saying, I'm a perfectionist. That's not really a weakness. That's some sort of a strength, but you can sort of say there's some aspects that are not great and could cause a problem, but it's not really a weakness that you're exposing. Some examples, you could say things like, I would like more experience in. Pick something that is not key to your role, but something you're looking to develop to broaden your experience and would be useful to advance in your career to the next stage. So maybe getting some understanding of the next level. So what do the people that are, say, 2 levels above you, what are they doing? What skills do they need that doesn't actually apply to your job, but you're going to develop that in time? If you're applying for a more junior role, you might say delegation, because you're not going to be delegating very much. If you're early in your career, you don't have experience of delegating very often, so that's something to improve. Or you could say that you're looking at improving your work-life balance, and how you're going to manage that better in future. You might have worked extremely hard in your degree and you would like to set aside a little bit of time every week for well-being, and that's one of the things you're looking to improve. And so that's how you get through the greatest weakness question. Pick a good weakness that shows that you're reflective but doesn't expose anything that's going to make it more difficult for you to be effective at your job, and use that structure talking about what you're doing more than what the problem of your weakness is. And that's how you get through this effectively. The next one you want to be prepared for is, can you tell me about yourself? And please don't waste this opportunity. This question is an opportunity. This is one of the few questions where you get to say whatever you like. You're not constrained by answering a specific question. You can talk about whatever you want. And you need to talk about the things that they want to hear. So the way you structure it is you talk about your past, you talk about now, what characteristics you have now, and then you talk about your future. That's a simple way to plan it out. And I would strongly recommend that you take the time and bullet point out an answer, learn it, be ready, be prepared. Because if they ask, talk me through your CV or tell me about yourself, why have you applied here? You're going to have stuff ready. You're going to have a ready to go answer for any of those questions by just pulling bits of this question apart. So plan it out and it will really massively help. It's such a useful thing to have ready for an interview. So for your past, you think about any banking experience. That is going to be the best experience. If you've had an internship, an insight day, if you've had a placement, if you've worked in a bank, in any capacity, that is the best experience that you can talk about. Internships, definitely, if they're not banking, but they are relevant, they are a great experience as well. Then think about your wider experience. So once you've talked about the banking and the most relevant experience, talk about your wider experience. And if the wider experience is really helpful to your role, talk a lot about it. If it's just a little bit relevant, or you've picked up some skills, but it doesn't match banking particularly brilliantly or the role, just mention it. It's better to mention it than not mention it, but you've got to use your time effectively. So talk most about the most relevant and least about the least relevant. It's quite obvious, but it's important to do it that way. Any training that you've done, any qualifications that you gained through that training, any mentoring, anything that shows that you developed skills and useful experience, and then your academic accomplishments, this is a good time to mention them. Just mentioning and packing in as much experience and accomplishments and training and knowledge into that past is really going to help. They're looking for someone that's got the right experience and is going to be effective at the job, and that's your chance to show that you've got that past experience. Then you need to think about now. How are you going to describe yourself? What skills and characteristics do you want to show off? So you could say things like you've got a very strong interest in finance and banking. Make it clear that this is something you're interested in. Then think about any specific skills you've learned in your past roles. So look at your previous jobs. What did you spend your time doing? What skills in those jobs match up with this job? Highlight those ones and give examples of when you used them. Then say that you're hardworking. That's an important characteristic, that you're someone that is easy to work with, that you're a team player, that you are ambitious, and that you strive to provide excellent customer service if you're applying for a role that involves lots of direct contact with customers. That is something that they're going to value. So pick as many of those as match your personal experience and your personal attributes, and be ready to talk about them. Then think about your future. And then the short version of why Wells Fargo is something you need to have ready. And I'm talking 1 to 2 sentences maximum. So when you're rounding off your answer, say, I've decided to apply to Wells Fargo because, and have the short answer there. And we'll look at the longer answer because they may ask, why did you apply to Wells Fargo directly? And so this can be the start of planning that. So you've got a full version if they ask it and a short version ready for this question. And then the next thing, you could say something like, I feel that I could build a long-term career and grow with Wells Fargo. Show that this is a company that you see yourself spending a long time with, and that this is somewhere where you could build a career. If that's the case, definitely say it. And then you could talk about what you're looking to develop over time, show an interest in your professional development. And you could say that I'm looking to develop my knowledge and skills in, and then talk about that. Make sure it's not something that is essential to the job, but something that everybody would want to work on and something that would help you advance within the business. You don't have to use that one, but if you do, that's how you talk about it. So make sure you planned out one, bullet point it, and have it ready for the interview, because it will help in so many questions and it will make you so much more confident in answering, and you'll come across better in the interview. The next question I want to look at is the tell me about a time question. There can be lots of different tell me about a time questions, so it's important to be good at answering those. One example that comes up frequently in jobs at Wells Fargo is tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult client. And we'll look at how you can answer this question, but also how you can answer tell me about a time questions in general. So let's start by thinking about what they actually want to hear in this question. The first thing you want to reassure them of is that you provide great customer service to all clients. Yes, this client is difficult, but it doesn't matter. I provide great service to everyone. The next thing you say is that you would always ensure I understand the client's needs and expectations. So when you've got a difficult client, the first thing you want to do is understand what do they actually want and what do they expect. Because if you understand what their needs are and you try and meet those needs, then you're probably going to solve the difficult aspect to a large extent. You're going to communicate clearly and transparently with clients, and that's how you maintain the relationships with the clients. Some examples of potentially difficult customers. So if you try to think of an example where you've been in this situation, these are some places where it could have occurred in your career, and that might jog your memory. So dealing with a complaint where you've got a very, very tight deadline and you've got a lot of pressure from the client, or where the client has very, very unreasonable expectations. And if you're using the unreasonable expectations example, you have to make sure that it is extremely unreasonable, not just challenging, but completely outrageously unreasonable, but where you at the end achieved a satisfactory result and the client was happy with it, and that you clearly and openly and transparently communicated and worked with the client to deliver on what the client really was looking for, perhaps in a more reasonable time frame, something like that. Let's look at how you actually structure the answers to any of the tell me about a time questions. So you start with the situation, then the task, then the actions that you took, and then the result that you got. And the result must be positive for any of these questions. So this is also known as the STAR technique. And you can see the first letters of each of those spell out STAR. So that's how you remember it. So for the situation, all you do is you think, what did the client want and why were they difficult? What was the cause of difficulty? Was it that they needed a ridiculously short turnaround, that they were extremely demanding, or that something had gone wrong and they were unhappy with the service that they provided and you needed to fix it? So the task is, what did you actually need to accomplish? What did you need to do to turn the situation around, to meet the client's expectations? Then the actions. What did you do to resolve any issues? And how did you deliver good service? Always use examples where good service happened, where the difficult client was dealt with professionally and effectively, and the end result was really good. And then for the result, how did you ensure success at the end? Do not pick an example that is not successful. You must pick a successful example. Otherwise, you're saying, I had a difficult client and I completely failed and it was awful and I'm hopeless and useless and don't hire me. Pick an example that's positive. Any tell me about a time questions, you ought to always be trying to look at a positive result where maybe things went wrong, but eventually it turned around and you fixed it and you got a positive result, because they would rather hire people that get results than people that don't. Remember that you're in an interview and that's what you're trying to show. The next question I want to look at is, why do you want to work for Wells Fargo? And of course, I can't tell you why you want to work for Wells Fargo, but what I can show you is the things you should and shouldn't say in your interview and what things you should think about. And this is a question that you need to have planned out. You should have a paragraph written and have practiced it. And I'm not saying talk about it from memory. Don't just read out your answer or recite perfectly from memory. That's not going to be very good. But having learned an answer and having bits of it, even if it's just a bullet pointed answer, will give you pointers and help you head in the right direction, give you some momentum and give you a strong and powerful answer. So let's think about what you want in your answer. So the first thing you want to think about is, what makes Wells Fargo stand out? Why Wells Fargo? Why not JP Morgan or Citibank? Why is Wells Fargo the right place for you? And you might say things like, they've got a consumer banking focus. If you're applying for consumer banking, that might be a really great thing to say. That you see a long-term career potential here. That Wells Fargo is a dynamic institution. Maybe talk about some news that you've read about the company that backs that up, that they're innovative. Think about the innovations that the company has done recently, that it invests in its people. Talk about you've spoken to some other employees and they've had positive experiences. You don't need to name them and say who they are, but say you know people that work at Wells Fargo, and before applying, you discussed the company with them and they were really positive, and then you can talk about some of the things they said about why Wells Fargo is a great place to work. You may have been a customer of the bank for a long time and you've had a great experience as a customer. You could talk about that as building an affinity for the brand. Or you could say that you've had a positive Wells Fargo internship or placement experience. You've had some experience working for the company, and that was really good. And that makes this bank stand out above everybody else. There are some things you could talk about. You got to think about what interests you about your chosen area of the bank. So when you're answering this question, don't just answer about why Wells Fargo. Say something about why you've picked this part of the bank and why that particularly interests you, and link that to your past experience and your academic learnings. Then you want to emphasize your banking and finance interests. Explain that you've got a really strong interest in this and that this industry is the right place for you, and be really passionate about that. Then you ought to think about how do you plan to develop at Wells Fargo? What are you going to do to be really, really great at your job? What development opportunities do you see here to advance and progress? And you can talk about that. But the most important thing is you want to be enthusiastic about the opportunity. So if you've thought about each of these questions, and I would suggest that for each of these, you have maybe 3 bullet points about each, and you're ready and confident to talk about those. Then when you're delivering it, you're not thinking about what am I going to say and try to make up an answer on the spot, which is not going to be a good answer. You're focusing on being enthusiastic, saying it really, really positively, and that you know exactly where you're going and your answer's got a nice structure to it. So plan it out, bullet point it, and that investment will pay off. Certain things you don't want to mention is saying that you live right next to your bank or the office and that you're applying here because it's convenient to you. That you talk about you offer a really great salary, or you start talking about money and how much money you can make. That's really negative in an interview. That you give the idea that it's an excellent place to start your career. Maybe you want to work for a hedge fund in 5 years and this is just what you have to do to be able to get into that industry. Maybe that's what you're thinking, but really, is the interview the right time to talk about leaving the company? If you're being interviewed by Wells Fargo, don't give the idea that you're planning to quit during the interview. You have to have the job before you can quit it. So do not ever give the impression that this is a stepping stone for you. That's going to go down very, very badly. And ultimately, if it doesn't enhance Wells Fargo's business, it's not going to be very interesting to them. So focus on things that's going to show you as the right fit for the bank. That's what they're looking for. They want people that fit in with their business. If you're not showing that off, don't talk about it. It's not going to help you. Now, the other thing that I'm going to recommend is that you have a Wells Fargo fact file prepared and learn it. You can't predict every single question that's going to be asked in the interview. There is an enormous number that they could potentially ask, but what you can do is be ready for anything that could come up and have that knowledge ready and available, and it really will help. It will, however, take some time and it will require an investment. You'll have to spend maybe 1 or 2 hours preparing this, but it really, really will help. And you'll see what in the interview, if any of this comes up, you've got something ready, you've thought about it. And it's much better to think about things before the interview than to try and think them up in the interview. So let's look at some things I recommend. So Wells Fargo's current stock price. I'm not talking about knowing it exactly to the individual cents that it goes down to, just a rough idea of where it is. Is it 1,000? Is it 50? Is it 26? Is it 12? That sort of level. You need to know roughly where it is. In fact, it's close to one of those, but some of them are completely off, and you have to know roughly where it is. Plus or minus a few dollars is fine. Right. Last year's revenue and profit is a good number to know. Just look at the annual report, have an awareness of that. Know the CEO, the chair, and who the head of the division, the section of the bank that you're applying to, who is in charge. That's a good name to know. Wells Fargo's main and emerging competitors. So there's the obvious main competitors, but who is emerging? Who's growing really fast? Who is walking into their territory and starting to compete with them? The innovative people that might start taking away some of their business and needs to be monitored, and Wells Fargo needs to adapt and innovate to meet that new competition. Who are they? And be aware of those. Look at current regulatory threats that the bank is facing. Have 1 or 2 examples ready. Then 3 pieces of recent interesting news about the bank. So look at the headlines over the last few months. What is very interesting that's happened? I would focus more on positive things, but have an awareness and read some news and pick out 3 of them, but read more widely so you're familiar with the recent history. Then look up a major deal completed recently in your business area, and that could be used at any point where you can give an example of something Wells Fargo has done that's interesting to you. So having that example ready is quite helpful. Then you can have the number of customers the bank serves. That gives you a good idea of the scale of the bank, and it's just a good number to use in the interview. Then you want to know the international markets that Wells Fargo operates in. How many countries have they got operations in? What do they do in different markets? They are heavily focused on the US, but they do have some business that goes beyond that. The bank's core value and vision statement. So, what are the bank's values? They may change slightly. The core stays the same, but they may be worded slightly differently. Know the current ones. The competitive threats the bank faces. How is banking changing? What does Wells Fargo need to do to keep up to date with that? You may have a suggestion for a growth opportunity. So they may ask, what should Wells Fargo do to grow? What opportunities does the bank have? Have one ready. And if you're applying for something that is research-based or based on the stock market or in an advisory capacity, having a good, compelling stock pick ready is a good idea. And I would pick something that is not extremely speculative and risky. Perhaps pick something a little bit more niche, but I'd focus on something that is not too racy or too extreme, something that is fairly safe but will generate decent returns, and you've got a strong case of why they will produce strong returns, and that is a really good idea. So feel free to take a screenshot of this or take some notes, and I would recommend you prepare that fact file. And with all of those facts, that will really help you be well prepared for your interview. The next thing you have to think about preparing is some questions to ask after your interview. And you may have certain questions that you're really interested in, and I would encourage you to ask those as long as they're appropriate. But here are some suggestions of some questions you might want to use. So you could say, I'm very interested in the role and would like to learn about the next steps. Could you please talk me through the next steps in Wells Fargo hiring process? Show that you really care about that and reiterate your interest in the job. You could say, in your experience, what would you say are the characteristics of highly successful Wells Fargo employees? And when they tell you what they are really looking for and what their highly effective employees look like, you can think about how you match up to what they're actually looking for. And then you might want to ask what originally attracted you to Wells Fargo. And when they say really positive things about the company and talk perhaps about their career and how it's panned out and whether their expectations were met, you can share in that enthusiasm and basically link that to the reasons why you are looking to join Wells Fargo. The other thing you could ask is, what would you recommend that a new hire prioritize in preparing to start at Wells Fargo if successful? And if they recommend you do certain reading or do certain research or learn something that's going to help you, make a commitment to doing that, and that will be really positive. And then the last thing you want to do is offer sincere and warm thanks for the interview and end on a positive note. And that will really help end the interview well. So I hope this video was helpful to you. If it was, please like and subscribe below. I wish you the best of luck in your Wells Fargo interview. And finally, thank you very much for watching.